Well, after several weeks of hit-and-miss shows on the UK tour, several weeks of them delivering shows that kind of felt like regular impacts rather than shows that felt consistently special and memorable, TNA finally nailed it. This is the kind of show I was talking about. This was a show that felt like a big deal, a show that delivered those moments that could only happen on the UK tour, that made the show stand out because they happened on the UK tour and gave you some bang for your buck at the same time. TNA took their sweet time building up to it, but finally, they got it. Yes! You know, I found myself strangely unenthused by Bobby Roode versus Eric Young Last Man Standing. And I feel kind of shitty saying that. This was a very good match. I don't know if I'd call it a great match. And that's more or less how I view this entire feud, really. The work has been good. There's nothing really bad about it. And yet, it just feels like something was always missing. Maybe it's because, for all the talk about how supposedly personal and bitter this rivalry is, it never really felt that way. EY's reasons for turning on Roode in the first place were a little flimsy, and Roode's been trying hard to sell it, but I don't know if he ever struck the right chord. Maybe Roode having all his personality sucked out in the last few months had something to do with this. Maybe it's his promos coming off as generic and cookie-cutter instead of really getting to the meat of the storyline. His best friend of many years, the man who was like his brother who stabbed him in the back, and what that did to him personally, how it affected him, how it made him feel. We never really got that promo. Instead, Roode was saying things like, "Eric Young, you cost me the world title. You almost cost me my career, but I'm still standing, and I'm gonna beat you, and I'm gonna win the world title back." You know, things that could apply to any feud, really. Not one that's supposed to be as personal as this one. You know, stuff like this is why Bobby Roode needs to turn heel. For some reason, the psychology of this storyline has never carried all the way through. Their lockdown match was solid, if unspectacular, but it never gave the impression that these guys wanted to fucking murder each other. And unfortunately, this match was kind of the same way. It was a very good, solid Last Man Standing match, but aside from one or two spots, like the table finish, which was really nice, there was an intensity that seemed to be lacking here. This just didn't feel like two former best friends who were violently torn apart and now despised each other with a passion. They were doing the moves, but I didn't feel the emotion of it. They tried, they did things, but EY does pile drivers all the time, so him doing them in this match was nothing out of the ordinary, and that's the problem. It should have felt out of the ordinary, and it didn't. For the most part, it just felt like a regular Last Man Standing match with a cool finish. It was more climactic than the lockdown match, and I do think it was the best match of the feud, but now that it's supposedly done, I don't feel like they ever went to the extremes they needed to in order to sell this rivalry properly, and the feud as a whole left me feeling a little unfulfilled. I hope the writers have something more in mind for Drew Galloway than just this hashtag stand up for wrestling stuff. It's fine as a way to introduce him, and he's done well with it so far, but I'm not entirely clear on what stand up for wrestling even means, aside from it being a way for them to take pot shots at WWE and sports entertainment. Anywho, Galloway cuts basically the same promo he cut last time. Him and MVP have a pretty good exchange, which leads to a decent match, which leads to an attack by the BDC, and people kind of oversold this on social media a little bit. It was a good beatdown, although low-key completely missed Galloway's head with that pipe. I don't think anything really set this apart from all the other beatdowns we've seen, but it did what it needed to do, advanced the feud with Galloway and the BDC. It's a fine segment for what it is, but I'd like to see them progress this storyline now and get to the meaning behind it, lest this whole stand-up thing start to feel hollow and meaningless like Cross the Line did before it. So Robbie E. and Brooke are still fighting over which one of them lost the amazing race for their team. Let me ask you a question. Do you really care at this point? Does anyone care anymore? The Amazing Race was months ago, TNA. There's a new season now. This is old news. You had a window to possibly capitalize on whatever interest there might have been in the wrestlers coming out of that season, but that window has closed. Everybody's moved on to the next thing. Maybe you should too. So they do Robbie versus Brooke, hopefully as a blow-off to this dumb feud. Brooke gave a great performance here. She got the crowd behind her. But Robbie just acts like an ass clown and tries to make a joke out of the whole thing because that's what Robbie is. That's what Robbie does. That's what he always does.
Please, get the camera off Robbie. He really gets on my nerves.
And it's disappointing to me that they decided to make a joke out of this because I have to admit, even though Robbie was being an irritating jackass as fucking usual, there was something oddly fascinating about this just because it was a man versus a woman, which you almost never see in mainstream wrestling. And I still think that if you treated them seriously, intergender matches could be a concept worth exploring. I didn't like how they presented it here. The storyline was stupid, but hey, Robbie lost, even though he had the entire bromance faction helping him, so at least the finish was the right one. Brooke was put over, Robbie got embarrassed like the joke that he is, both things that I'm a big proponent of. Can we please get Brooke away from this loser and into a real feud now, TNA? To me, Magnus vs. Bram had all the intangible elements that Rude vs. EY for some reason just didn't have. Maybe it's because these two are more charismatic and just better equipped to handle a storyline like this. Maybe it's because the angle has been written better. Whatever the reason is, it worked. Really well. We saw Magnus and Bram as friends. Real friends. In more meaningful ways than just them kissing each other's asses on the mic every week. Then when Bram turned on Magnus, we saw how that affected Magnus on a personal level, how that affected him as a man. Magnus was made to look sympathetic. And then when he came back, he didn't spout a bunch of cliches and wrestling tropes that we've seen a million times before. He looked legitimately upset and betrayed, and we felt that. We saw his raw emotions, which is something that we never really got with Rude. And the psychology of the match was a lot better too. They don't even finish their entrances before they start fighting. Bram is attacking the injured neck and shoulder. He doesn't care about winning the match, he just wants to hurt this guy. Then it goes even further when Mickey gets involved. Bram hates Magnus so much, he doesn't just want to injure him, he wants to humiliate him, break him down, take away his dignity in front of his lady. This was really powerful, effective stuff. It's baffling to me that Rude and EY have a decade of history to draw from, and yet Bram and Magnus, who we saw together for a matter of months, produced something so much more compelling with basically the same story. The feud is made that much more personal. Bram gets a ton of heat on himself. The crowd gets anxious to see Magnus kick his ass later. This was great! And hey, it's two Brits having an awesome and really compelling segment in London. That's the kind of stuff that's supposed to happen on the UK tour, TNA.
Yes! 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 Yes!
And then it got even better. The best feud in this company right now gets the main event. EC3 and Rockstar Spud, hair versus hair. And man, did this fucking deliver.
Rockstar Spud is in the building!
Poor Spud. He tried. He showed a ton of heart, but he should have known what was going to happen here. I mean, our Lord of Wrestling, EC3, lose a match? To a mere mortal? Get his head shaved when his haircuts probably cost more than your car? That's preposterous! What were you thinking, Spud? Were you drunk?
I'm on a hell of a lot of fucking Jägermeister!
Well, that explains it. Not only was this the best segment of the show, not only was this the best segment of the UK tour, this might have been the most compelling segment TNA have done, period, in quite some time. This segment had everything. Two characters that we're emotionally invested in, with a well-crafted storyline and in-ring psychology that they sold perfectly. It was a very heated, personal rivalry, so it had to get brutal and disturbing. It had to get bloody. That's how they make you believe that they really fucking hate each other. And TNA showed that with the blade job and going black and white at certain points. This was everything Bobby Roode Eric Young should have been, but wasn't. It's no mystery why this was the match the crowd was the most into all night, and it had nothing to do with Spud being a Brit. You could argue that Rude vs. EY was a better match technically, but EC3 and Spud told a much better story, and that's what made the difference. And then they went the extra mile afterward, with EC3 putting Spud over like he respected him, only to take it back and shave his head anyway. EC3 looked fucking despicable with that. They put so much heat on him here, it was beautiful. And even though Spud lost the match and got his head shaved, he came out of this looking like a bigger star than ever. Out-fucking-standing stuff. I just have one question. Where the hell was Mandrews in all this?
The Rockstar Spud has left the building.
This was the show I've been waiting the whole UK tour to see. That's mostly because of EC3 versus Spud and Bram versus Magnus, but Rude versus EY was still a very good match, even if the storytelling was lacking some things in my opinion. And Brooke getting put over, Robbie E getting humiliated like a giant fucking loser, those aren't bad things either. Also, the pacing was very good here too. They didn't try to do too much. The entire show was basically 5 extra long segments, so they were able to devote enough time to each one so everything was satisfying and nothing felt rushed. Believe it or not, to me, this Impact felt more like a pay-per-view on free TV than Lockdown did. It took almost until the end of the UK tour, but TNA finally delivered a show that really felt like these are the biggest TV shows we do all year, so let's go out there, blow the roof off, and make some fucking magic. And hot damn, they pulled it off. Good job, TNA. Very good. Over. Out.